Hello everyone, for today's story, it is all about Scent of Apples by Vin Binedo and Santos. But before we will start the story, let me tell you first the life background of Bienvenido and Santos. Bienvenido and Santos, born on March 22, 1911, and died on January 7, 1996. He was a Filipino-American fiction, poetry, and non-fiction writer. He was born and raised in Tondo, Manila. His family roots are originally from Lubao, Pampanga, Philippines. He lived in the United States for many years where he is widely credited as a pioneering Asian American writer. Santos received his Bachelor of Arts degree from the University of the Philippines where he first studied creative writing under Paz Marquez Benitez. In 1941, Santos was a government pensionado or a scholar in the United States at the University of Illinois, Columbia University, and Harvard University. He had arrived in San Francisco on October 12, 1941, aboard the Ruth Alexander, leaving his wife and 3 daughters in the Philippines. When war in Pacific came to the Philippines on December 8, December 7 Hawaii time, he feared he would never see his family again, a reality that not only interrupted his study of realism, it was overwhelming it, leading to a transformation in his sense of national consciousness and identity. That crisis changed the nature of his writing into a less carefree style to one mixing laughter and pain, described by Florentino Valeros as a man hiding tears in his laughter. In 1967, he returned to the United States to become a teacher and a university administrator. Scent of Apples won a 1980 American Book Award from the Before Columbus Foundation. He was also a professor of creative writing and distinguished writer in a residence at Wichita State University from 1973 to 1982, at which time the university awarded him an honorary doctorate degree in human letters. After his retirement, Santos became visiting writer and artist at De La Salle University in Manila. The university honored Santos by renaming its creative writing center after him. So let us know the reason why the author wrote the story. Scent of Apples was written during the rebirth of freedom. It shows the lives of the Filipino abroad, the immigrant Filipino who can't come back to their homeland because they don't have enough money. Not only about the immigrant but also to all the OFW who work hard just to support the family that left in the Philippines. And it is about a man who longing for his native land. Everybody can feel the homesick thing, especially if they are close to someone and afraid to lose it. The author expresses feeling on what emotions he has that time when he is in the other country. So let's move on to the summary of the story. In the audience, someone else speaks, a man this time. Santos can tell from his appearance that he is also Filipino, a farmer who works just outside of Kalamazoo. He left the Philippines more than 20 years ago. He wants to take the conversation one step further. He asks Santos whether Filipino women are the same now as they were all those years ago. At this question, the audience hushes, listening closely for the answer. Santos feels put on the spot. He doesn't know how to answer. He's worried about giving the man false impression, but he also doesn't want to shatter the man's ideals about his homeland. He doesn't want to come across insincere either. There is a long pause as Santos decides how best to answer. When he does, he has a strategy. He asks the man to explain how he remembers the women so he can draw a proper comparison. This allows him to see how best to answer the question. The man explains the women used to be natural, kind, loyal, and modest. He fondly remembers how they used to dress and says it's the men who've lost their faith and character. Santos knows now how to answer him. He explains that while the women have changed on the outside, they still have the same temperament and strength of religious faith. The man seems happy with this explanation, and Santos can rest easy knowing he hasn't disappointed anyone. The answer is also to his mind, and honest one. However, the rest of the talk feels less important after the interruption, and Santos knows he'll think about it for a while. When he leaves the lecture, Santos meets the man outside. He learns that his name is Celestino Fabia, and he labors on farmland 30 miles away. He saw Santos' names in one day in the local paper and recognizing a Filipino patriot, traveled all this way to hear him speak about how things used to be. Fabia invites Santos to dinner the following day, and he accepts the invitation. Santos goes to meet Fabia, who is overjoyed to introduce his family to a fellow Filipino who reminds him of how things and Filipino used to be. Fabia worries over whether his house is messy or dilapidated, but Santos doesn't notice. He knows Fabia is a farmer and money is very tight. And he's also not a superficial man. He's looking forward to meeting everyone. On the way, Santos spots apple trees. They remind him of home, and he's suddenly filled with nostalgia and sadness. Sometimes it seems he can't balance his memories with building a new life. Fabia feels the same, and he pours out his thoughts to Santos, who feels privileged to hear them. They both fondly remember their youth, but it's sad to think everything's changed. Santos is embarrassed by how he feels when he meets Fabia's wife, Ruth. He notices she's unattractive and her hands are rough. He knows he shouldn't notice such things, and he hopes it doesn't show on his face. He feels especially bad when he hears everything Ruth has done for Fabia over the years, including working all hours for very little money just to afford things like health care. She reminds Fabia of Filipino women, and Santos agrees. Toward the end, Santos tells Fabia he plans on going home and would like to visit Fabia's town. Fabia doesn't want him to because he knows no one will remember him, and perhaps because he wants to remember it as it was, not as it is now. Scent of Apples reminds us of the struggles Filipinos experience letting go of their homeland and trying to make a new life with nothing but memories of how things used to be. Now let's move on to characters. First, we have Filipino young man who went to Kalamazoo, America for conference, wherein he had answered questions about Filipino and American women. Second, we have Celestino Fabia, a Filipino farmer who lives in America together with his family. He was the one who asked about the Filipino women. He invited the Filipino young man to his home and remembered his long-lost youth. Third, we have Roger Fabia, the son of Celestino and Ruth, admired the Filipino young man. And lastly, we have Ruth Fabia, the wife of Celestino Fabia, and took care of Celestino when he was sick even though she was pregnant. Then, let us move on to setting. First setting, we have the Kalamazoo. The Filipino young man went to Kalamazoo even if the war was still on to attend a conference. The second setting is the Fabia's place or house, wherein Celestino invited the Filipino young man to come by and eat dinner. For the last setting, we have the conference room, wherein the Filipino young man and Mr. Fabia discuss about how the Filipino women of today were different from the stereotype he was familiar with. And now let us move on for the theme of the story. For the first theme, we have home. The idea of home is not a place where he was born and grew up, but where he is at present. Home also let their memories bring back. They remembered how they lived before and what life they have. For the second theme, we have immigrants. To live amongst the scent of apples, something not as present in the homeland, yet strangely reminding of it. When you are away of your hometown, there must be things and food that would let you remember the life before. And for our last theme, we have loss and isolation that many immigrants can feel. They can be plagued by a continual sense of missing their home country, but they may know that they cannot return, at least not at any point soon. So let us move on to our symbols. For our first symbols, we have scent of apples. Symbolizes exile, loneliness, and isolation and deep longing for his homeland, the Philippines. Second, we have flower painting. symbolizes preservation of Filipino women. And lastly, for our symbols, we have winter, symbolizes observer of hope. And now, let us move on for our last topic, which is the lesson. The lesson that I have learned from the story is be nationalistic. Even you are in the other country, never forget where you came from and serve the nation with no doubts. And for the second lesson that I have learned from the story is preserve the positive traits of Filipinos. Do not ever look down the Filipino even you are talking with foreign people, because if you look down first, they would not respect all the Filipinos at all. Respect must start with us as a citizen of the Philippines. And lastly, for the lesson that I have learned from the story is a person should be grateful for any job he or she can get. Yet, be thankful because not everyone has an opportunity to get a job, and it caused that they live their life miserable. So that's all. Thank you for listening, and I hope you've learned from the story. And I am Cherlyn May Lozano. Goodbye, have a nice day, and God bless us all.